Personal Log, Battlelord Turgon. Every story has a beginning, and every story has an end. Oftentimes, when a land is in its darkest time, when the villain is just about to win, the free races set aside their differences and unite. They band together, their heroes leading the charge, and in a desperate last stand, they defeat the villain and his army. It's a funny thing when history mirrors story, but we seldom ask, what happens next? What happens after the great battle? How do civilizations rebuild? Will things go back to the way things were? I'm getting ahead of myself, as I often do, but story rarely addresses these questions, and when they do, everything goes well. It's a shame that reality is a cruel mistress. The young human, Dane Itani. In an odd way, his colony can thank him for their lives. For myself and the fellow lords, we personally monitor worlds that Mindlord Sendril sees with her visions of the future. We check and see if the citizens could integrate themselves with little trouble into our society. A world filled with fanatics would cause more trouble than they would be worth. Not everyone should be saved. For Tani's world, it fit the bill to be avoided. It was a world where more than half of the planet were violent fanatics. But like I said before, Dane was different. To understand where I'm coming from, I have to go back to the tipping point of the Eldar Empire. It must have been the mid-21st millennia, though I have a hard time remembering the details from that far back. I lived on a world near Earth's, or rather, Terra's, solar system. The world unto itself was insignificant, but to the humans in the Federation, it was impressive. The young race was in the midst of a golden age of technology. Unlike most of my race, I had several interactions with them, though not by choice. I lived on the world with my wife and daughter. However, to say I lived on the world is a bit incorrect. All across the Empire, my race had fallen into debauchery and sin. Pleasure cults were everywhere, and I wanted nothing to do with them. Something my wife disapproved of. I devoted myself to the worship of my gods. At that point in time, it was Cain, the god of war. In my part of space, orcs had become a true nuisance, especially for the humans. To counteract this, as well as worship Cain, I joined a ranger band. At the time, Eldar Rangers weren't as we know them today. In truth, the Eldar aren't as they were today, but the Rangers were a group of militia. The Eldar army didn't really exist at this point in time. Outside of the occasional orc encounter, there was no one who could, or did, oppose us. Besides the orcs, who were more of a problem for humans than for the Eldar, but they did still present a problem on the fringes of the Empire. So the Rangers were followers of Cain, those who wished to test themselves in battle and fight in larger conflicts. Over time, I gained command of the largest ranger band in the galaxy. The Eldar human border was a great recruiting ground for those who wished to fight orcs. We fought side by side with humans and the other younger races. At the time, it wasn't because we thought of them as equals. Far from. We fought with them because the orcs kept attacking them. We wanted to fight the toughest species in the galaxy. We wanted a challenge. Humans couldn't give us that. I'd be lying if I said I didn't share this sentiment, but that would change. When I wasn't fighting, I was back home taking care of my daughter. My wife had fallen in with a pleasure cult, and I couldn't really blame her. Most of our race had done the same thing, and I was gone all the time. I guess I just accepted it. Much like Atani and his father, my Scylla and I spent as much time as we could together before I had to leave. My wife was gone all the time, and this neglect gave Scylla an aversion to the pleasure cults. She resented the Rangers, but she viewed it as a necessary evil. They were protecting the Empire from the Orcs. I didn't correct her. However, after a long deployment, I came back home to see Scylla dead, and my wife doing things with other cult members in the room. She had went off the deep end, as did the rest of the planet. The days after that are all a blur. But I remembered strangling the life out of Scylla's murderer. The entire planet had given in to debased, vile, and downright evil debauchery. I gathered my rangers and got out of there. I don't know what it was. Either the cults agreed to coordinate their actions or a coincidence, or perhaps the manipulation of Chaos Gods. Perhaps Zeech. But all across the Empire, worlds were reduced to violent, bloody orgies. The Empire's degenerate behavior had finally reached a breaking point. Those of us who couldn't take this fled. Some via craft worlds, others became exodites. The remnants of the Eldar Empire were scattered to the wind. After Scylla's death, I lost my faith in Cain, and altered my ranger's mission. We would no longer fight orcs. Instead, we would avenge the deaths of the innocent. We would fight for our kind. For I don't know how many years, we slaughtered our darker counterparts and waged a war against the Headless Empire. I'd be lying if I said that we did this solely for a glorious cause. In truth, it was driven solely by vengeance. Over time, we attracted the other ranger bands and created a mighty fleet. We couldn't take the Empire, but we could inflict serious damage. 3 of our battleships that we had at our disposal at that time would later on be repurposed as the 3 smaller arcs that now reside near Guareth. Despite our success, all we were doing was killing. We were rebels without a cause, at least until we found Guareth. Future Mind Lord Syndro had taken her craft world to this planet on the edge of the galaxy. At the time, this world was a research outpost for a band of outcasts, the followers of future Cyberlord Gelwyn, and Gelwyn herself. The arrogance within the Eldar species drove out many of our brightest minds. To the Empire, there was no need for science, for advancement. We already knew everything. As our fleet arrived, so did Ink Lord Tur and his band of misfits. He commanded a craft world and dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge, but not in the same way as Gelwyn. He had a general interest in the younger races. He was intrigued by their history, culture, and even their food. His group was the smallest of the 4, but they were all quite memorable. The 4 of us, though at the time we didn't mean for this, banded together to rebuild the Empire, to make it better, or at the very least create something new. Guareth and the other worlds the 4 of us colonized formed the Grey Havens. To the Eldar of the craft world, we weren't true Eldar. We turned away from what made our empire great. In that regard, they weren't wrong. All of us were oddities within the Empire. Our darker counterparts viewed us as foolish and as a threat. Some of us killed them outright, while others dealt with the younger races. To the craft worlds, we were too dark, too deviant. To our darker counterparts, we were too light, too foolish. We called our home the Grey Havens to mock them. For centuries we built our civilization, while myself and the Rangers held the Dark Eldar, a term we used for simplicity. Many of us thought of ourselves as true Eldar, as did the craft worlds. But all in all, we held our darker cousins at bay. As the conflict continued, as the Dark Eldar got worse and worse, we all started to come to an understanding, at least one that would become relevant later on. As the centuries passed, the disjointed remnants of the Empire started to pull itself together. A warlord named Angmar created a vast empire on the border of human space. His army swelled with highly trained Eldar warriors and, more disturbingly, slaves of the younger races. He was the first of 9 Black Kings of the Eldar. Our empire had fallen apart, but these 9 individuals saw an opportunity. At first, these 9 fought amongst themselves, but little was gained through this meaningless battle. King Angmar and King Kamul were the first to ally with each other, and in time, the rest followed suit. With the might of the galaxy at their back, the Black Kings declared war on every younger race. They would make the galaxy submit beneath their feet and become slaves to their whims. With humanity leading the charge, the younger races allied with one another. They didn't stand a chance on their own, but together they had something. Humanity was the most populous of the races and was by far the most powerful. They may not have had the Eldar's raw psychic talent, but they had something just as powerful: ingenuity and bravery. I look back on this time with great sorrow. To see what humanity has become now saddens me. They had the ability to rise above the Eldar, to be better than us. But now, well, they are a shadow of their former selves. The War of Black Dawn had fallen upon the galaxy, and for the first time in thousands of years, the entire galaxy was at war. Myself and the other future lords of the Eldar came to the same conclusion. The time of the Eldar was over. We had our time in the sun. We had our time to control the galaxy, to guide it, but we failed. Instead of following the footsteps of the old ones, instead of guiding the younger races to be like us, to make the galaxy a better place, we turned to pleasure, to our own selfish desires. All of us agreed that the future belonged to the younger races, and we had to do everything we could to ensure they had a future. We declared war on our own kind, and we would not give up until they were either destroyed or we were. Thankfully, though, the Grey Havens was hidden from the prying eyes of the enemy. This allowed us to throw everything into the conflict. Kamul had mustered a vast armada and attacked the Alliance capital, Earth. Despite humanity and the other race's best effort, they were losing the battle. The Dark Eldar's fleet had them outmatched in every way, including numbers. The younger races had their backs against the wall, but I came to their rescue with the entire Haven fleet. To say the battle was won in that one moment would be a lie. The battle for Earth lasted for months. On the ground, we fought side by side with the younger races, and in space, we acted as a bulwark against the coming darkness. In the midst of the fighting, a hero for humanity emerged, an icon they desperately needed. I have forgotten his name due to the slow decay of time, but I do remember his face, and I remember the title he would have one day. He rallied the scattered forces of the Alliance, and with our aid, we drove the Eldar off Earth, but not before I cornered Kamul and mounted his head on my ship. All across the galaxy, on every besieged world. News of our victory spread. The younger races had lost every battle up until that point. Hope had been rekindled. In the aftermath of the battle, I offered my services to the Alliance, to the hero. Together, Eldar, humanity, and every younger race came together and formed into something new. They formed the Galactic Alliance, a federation that would work together to drive out the Dark Eldar, to rebuild the galaxy when the war was over, and more importantly, to create a better future. For decades, I led the fleet of the Galactic Alliance, and the hero led her armies. I always wondered why the hero loved swords. It seemed rather ineffective when everyone had guns, but the man made it work. With the brightest minds of every race working together, weapons of war the likes of which we'd never seen were created. Each race focused on a project. For the Havens, we focused on a weapon that could annihilate the Dark Eldar fleet. However, humanity was a bit more ambitious. Humanity began to retool their robots. In the years past, they were used for manual labor and as basic infantry soldiers, but they needed something more. The first Men of Iron, semi-intelligent war droids, were produced. They were smarter, faster, and more durable than their standard robot. And on the ground, they became their most powerful weapon against the Eldar. As a race, we Eldar may be fast, graceful even, but we are nowhere near as tough as a human being. These Men of Iron could take a lot of damage, and could dish out just as much. An enemy that can't be intimidated is an intimidating foe to face. As the war progressed, humanity made their droids more and more intelligent, more and more sentient. Gelwin remarked that these Men of Iron could become a threat once the Eldar had been dealt with, but humanity paid no heed. The race may have been brave, but they were still naive, still very, very foolish. The war slowly passed from decades to centuries. All over the galaxy, many of the younger races were wiped out. Some were forced into slavery, but most didn't last long. Their deaths while in slavery were merely prolonged. Eventually, the Grey Havens were found, and a massive campaign to destroy them was launched. It felt like the full might of the Dark Eldar had descended upon us. 5 of the Black Kings threw their entire military might at us, but despite losing countless worlds and trillions of people, we made them pay. The hero of humanity killed 2 of these Black Kings in single combat. He goaded them into attacking. He hurt their pride. Once they were dead, their forces succumbed to infighting. I took the opening he gave me and wiped out those fleets. Glorfin, the leader of the consolidated younger race's military, killed the other 3 in a desperate maneuver. One of the havens had been dedicated to refugees of the younger races. Glorfin took his forces to that world to defend it. But after the death of 2 Black Kings, the 3 remaining wanted to make a point. New Haven, as the younger races called it, was the most populous world in the Grey Havens. The 3 Black Kings attacked it with everything they had. I tried to pull my fleet out of the front line to aid those at New Haven, but I couldn't. If I did, then the full might of the Dark Eldar would have descended upon us. I truly had no choice but to stay and fight. It was a decision that I still have trouble coming to terms with. Glorfin's fleet was small, as was his army. He knew he couldn't win, so he did the only thing he could. He stood his ground. He ordered his fleet to evacuate as many civilians as possible, and all across New Haven, space-worthy ships aided in the evacuation. Only a handful of the population could leave the planet. There wasn't enough room for a fraction of them, let alone everyone.
In a desperate bid to kill as many Eldar as possible, Glorfin lured the Black Kings to the surface. The fight was one-sided. Glorfin was losing badly, but his army was there just to buy time. Several Eldar Psykers were on the planet, and on Glorfin's command, these Psykers, as well as anyone with psychic potential, was sent to an opening in the planet. An opening that led to the world's core. From there, the Psykers focused their energy into the core, and for a lack of a better term, they made the core go supernova. The world and half of the solar system was obliterated. I wish I could say Glorfin's sacrifice meant something. I wish I could say those who fled the world got to live on, but I can't. Some of the Dark Eldar's fleet saw the fleeing vessels and gave chase. The civilians didn't stand a chance. Time may have forgotten the race Glorfin belonged to, as it has forgotten the other, younger races who fought and died to make the galaxy a better place. But their actions, their sacrifices still live on, so long as there are those who remember it. We drove the Dark Eldar out of the Grey Havens, but the fighting had cost the lives of gods I don't know anymore. Thankfully, Gwareth was left untouched, as was Gelwyn's superweapon, the Sun Crusher. A monstrous hulk of a vessel, this single-use weapon did something similar to what happened at New Haven, though on a grander scale. Once it was in range of a star, the machine manipulated time with the powers of the warp. To put it simply, this machine aged the sun at a rapid rate, causing the sun to go supernova. Gelwyn theorized this weapon could destroy the heart of the Dark Eldar Empire, Angband, Angmar's capital. Despite our success at holding the Empire at bay, the Galactic Alliance was on its last legs. There used to be 100 or so younger races, but now there was only a handful. Our fleets had shrunken into small battle groups. Our armies were under-provisioned, our morale wavering. We were on the brink of defeat. All we could do was one last desperate assault. Across the galaxy, every ship and soldier in the Galactic Alliance pulled out and rendezvoused at Earth. If we failed, this would be our last battle. Our last alliance. With the Sun Crusher at my back, I ordered the fleet to Angband. We caught the Dark Eldar by surprise, but that advantage didn't last long. Angmar and the other Black Kings were there, their fleets in tow. With the death of 5 Black Kings, parts of the Empire had fallen into chaos. All across the galaxy, Dark Eldar slaughtered one another, some for power, others for pleasure. Angmar had called the other 2 kings together in a bid to bring about order. We gambled everything into a desperate bid, and it had paid off. Over Angband's orbit, the fleets clashed. The loss of life was staggering. The humans threw waves of autonomous war droids at the Dark Eldar. My people used our battleships as cover for our allies, and the younger races fought with a fanatical fervor. For many of them, they were the last of their race, and they would make sure the Dark Eldar paid for their crimes, right up until the end. We all fought side by side. We all fought together. A galaxy united under one cause, one banner. For a moment, one shining moment in the history of the galaxy, we truly fought as one. With the Sun Crusher in position, the ending of our tragic tale began. For several agonizing minutes, we fought against the might of the Empire, and we were losing. When the Sun Crusher was ready, I ordered every vessel to retreat. A captain, whose name I never learned, refused my order, stating someone had to guard the weapon, someone had to make sure it went off. Over my comms, I heard many captains agree. Captains from the younger races. For most of those crews, they had lost everything, and their species couldn't be brought back. There wasn't enough of them to start again. I replied back simply, acknowledged. The fleet jumped, and the weapon went off. The power of the weapon was greater than Gelwen anticipated. Instead of only destroying Angband alone, the energy wave spread out to hundreds of systems, thousands even, killing an unspeakable amount of Eldar. With the war over, many of us thought we would have peace, that there would be a dawn of a new era, a brighter future. We were wrong. What came instead was a black dawn. Almost every younger race died out. They didn't have the means to continue, while others regressed back to the Stone Age. Humanity tried to pick up the remains of its civilization, but the Men of Iron revolted, leading to another conflict, and later on, the Age of Strife. Then through the degeneracy of my race, Slaanesh was born, and the Eye of Terror was formed. I still don't believe it was a coincidence that Angband used to reside where the Eye of Terror is now. In a bid to hide from Slaanesh, Sendril had myself and the other lords go through a psychic ritual that created the Veil. For a brief moment, I saw the dream I had been fighting for. A brighter galaxy. A galaxy with a future. With the Havens, we tried to rebuild the galaxy, but now there is nothing to rebuild. Humanity is a shell of what it once was, as are the Eldar. The younger races we put our faith in are either gone or savages. The civilizations of the 41st millennia are failures. But there's still good in the people. Maybe my dream can still come true. Maybe there's still hope. Maybe we can start again.